Can you lose weight on a low saturated fat diet? Fat provides twice as many calories per gram as carbohydrate and protein, so eating a low-fat diet is an effective way to cut calories and improve weight loss. What happens when you stop eating saturated fat? Reducing saturated fat intake has no effect on your risk of heart disease or death. Saturated fat from certain food sources may affect the risk of heart disease differently. Replacing saturated fat with polyunsaturated fat may reduce your risk of cardiovascular events, but results are mixed. Which food is highest in saturated fat? Whole milk, cream, and full-fat dairy. Full-fat dairy products contain some of the highest amounts of saturated fat. Whipped cream, for example, tops the charts with a whopping 23.2 grams of saturated fat per cup, which is more than a day's worth in terms of the recommended daily value. Do you actually need saturated fat? Should I eat them or not? The American Heart Association recommends limiting saturated fats, which are found in butter, cheese, red meat and other animal-based foods, and tropical oils. Decades of sound science has proven it can raise your bad cholesterol and put you at higher risk for heart disease. What are 3 tips for reducing saturated fat intake? Choose lower fat or reduced fat dairy products or dairy alternatives. Grill, bake, poach or steam food rather than frying or roasting. Measure oil with a teaspoon to control the amount you use, or use an oil spray. Trim visible fat and take the skin off meat and poultry before cooking it. What are 3 foods that are low in saturated fat? Choose fish, chicken, turkey and lean meats. Use dried beans, peas, lentils and tofu. Limit egg yolks to 3 or 4 per week. If you eat red meat, limit to no more than 3 servings per week and choose loin or round cuts. Can you live without eating saturated fat? In moderation, it can be part of a heart-healthy diet. It's wise to limit your intake of saturated fat, but you don't need to go crazy eliminating it from your diet. For one thing, that's almost impossible to do, since good sources of unsaturated fats, like olive or canola oil, contain some saturated fat as well. How long does it take to get saturated fat out of your body? The amount of time that fat takes to digest varies from person to person and between men and women. In the 1980s, Mayo Clinic researchers found that the average transit time from eating to elimination of stool was approximately 40 hours. Total transit time averaged at 33 hours in men and 47 hours in women. Does saturated fat give you a belly? The type of fat you eat may affect not only your heart disease risk, but also where on your body you pack on extra pounds, new research suggests. People who ate extra amounts of saturated fat tended to accumulate fat around their waistlines and livers. How much saturated fat per day if you have high cholesterol? 11 to 13 grams. For people who need to lower their cholesterol, the American Heart Association recommends reducing saturated fat to less than 6% of total daily calories. For someone eating 2,000 calories a day, that's about 11 to 13 grams of saturated fat. Is saturated fat harder to burn off? Because the saturated fat molecules are so tightly packed together, they're harder for our bodies to break down. They also have a higher melting point, which is why they're solid at room temperature. Think coconut oil and butter. Unsaturated fats, on the other hand, have double bonds that saturated fats don't have. What causes too much saturated fat? Because saturated fat tends to raise low-density lipoprotein, LDL, cholesterol levels in the blood. High cholesterol levels can increase your risk of heart disease and stroke. Saturated fat occurs naturally in red meat and dairy products. It's also found in baked goods and fried foods. How do I lower my saturated fat and cholesterol? Most come from animal products, like dairy, meat, and poultry. To limit the amount of saturated fats you eat, choose lower fat and lean options of dairy, meat, and poultry, like skim milk, lean beef, and grilled chicken breast without the skin. Eating too many foods high in saturated fats can be bad for your health. What is worse for you, saturated fat or cholesterol? Saturated fat is a bigger culprit for raising blood cholesterol in general than dietary cholesterol. How much exercise does it take to burn saturated fat? For fat loss, a target of 1 hour per day is a desirable objective. People who are new to regular exercise, or who are returning to exercise after a break, can start with lower amounts and build up towards doing low to moderate intensity aerobic exercise for at least 20 to 30 minutes on 4 to 5 days each week. How do you flush out saturated fat? Drink at least 8 ounce glasses of water a day. Drinking plenty of water keeps the body hydrated and encourages the body to flush out fat. Is saturated fat the same as cholesterol? Saturated fat. There are different types of fat in the food we eat, and saturated fats are the type that raise blood cholesterol. Many foods contain saturated fat, especially animal foods such as meat, butter and dairy products, and foods that are made with them, such as cakes and biscuits. Are eggs high in saturated fat? Eggs are fairly low in fat. One average egg, 58 grams, contains around 4.6 grams fat, which is about a teaspoon. Only a quarter of this is saturated fat, the type that raises cholesterol levels in the body. What saturated fats to avoid? The American Heart Association recommends limiting saturated fats, which are found in butter, cheese, red meat and other animal-based foods, and tropical oils. Decades of sound science has proven it can raise your bad cholesterol and put you at higher risk for heart disease. Guidelines for a low cholesterol, low saturated fat diet. Limit total intake of fats and oils. Avoid butter, stick margarine, shortening, lard, palm and coconut oils. Limit mayonnaise, salad dressings, gravies and sauces, unless they are homemade with low-fat ingredients. Limit chocolate.